What happens when a waitress, drowning in debt and invisible to the world, comes face to face with a billionaire's fury? We're not talking about a simple complaint. We're talking about a storm of power and rage so intense it silences a 5-star London restaurant. He's a man who can buy and sell entire city blocks, and he's about to ruin lives over a single mistake. He's already on his feet, his bodyguards moving in the end of a career for the terrified manager. But then the waitress does something impossible. She speaks 4 words. 4 words in a language no one expects, in a dialect so specific and personal, it stops the billionaire dead in his tracks. This isn't a story about good service. It's about a secret that connects 2 worlds and a single sentence that changes everything. The air in the Gilded Lyre. A bastion of old money and new power nestled in the heart of Mayfair, was usually thick with the scent of truffle oil and quiet confidence. Tonight, however, it was sharp with the metallic tang of fear. The source of this disturbance was a man at table 7, the most coveted alcove in the restaurant, a man whose presence usually guaranteed a level of hushed reverence, usually reserved for royalty. Khalid al-Jamil was not a king, but he was close. A Saudi construction and technology magnate, his net worth was a matter of public speculation and private awe. His face, usually a stoic mask of handsome, sun-weathered features, was currently a thundercloud of raw fury. His dark eyes, which had appraised multi-billion-dollar energy contracts with unnerving calm just that morning, were now fixed on the trembling restaurant manager, Mr. Davies. Incompetence. Khalid's voice was low, yet it cut through the muted clinking of cutlery across the entire dining room. It was a voice accustomed to absolute obedience, a voice that didn't need to be raised to command a legion. I do not tolerate incompetence, not in my boardroom, and certainly not when I am paying a small fortune for a piece of fish. The offending item lay on a pristine white plate, a Dover sole filleted tableside. The supposed error, a minuscule bone no larger than an eyelash, had been spotted by one of his 2 ever-present aides. For anyone else, it would be an oversight. For Khalid al-Jamil, on this particular day, it was a profound insult. It was the final crack in a dam that had been straining to hold back a flood of frustration all week. A colossal green energy deal, the legacy project of his career, had just imploded that afternoon, due to a betrayal he was still struggling to process. The bone was not the reason for his anger. It was merely the target. Mr. Davies, a man who had placated ambassadors and Hollywood stars, was visibly sweating. Mr. al-Jamil, I am profoundly sorry. It is an inexcusable lapse. Please allow us to remake the entire meal for you and your party. Of course, there will be no charge. No charge. Khalid let out a short, incredulous laugh that was devoid of any humor. Do you think this is about money? Do you have any idea who I am? He pushed his chair back, the sound scraping harshly against the marble floor. The entire restaurant flinched. His 2 bodyguards, monolithic men in tailored suits, moved with fluid precision, one stepping toward the door, the other placing a hand discreetly on the small of his boss's back. This is about standards, about a promise of perfection that you have failed to keep. We are leaving. Panic flashed in Mr. Davies's eyes. A walkout by Khalid al-Jamil wasn't just a bad review. It was a black mark on the ledger of London's elite. It was a story that would be whispered from Knightsbridge to Kensington. It was in this supercharged moment that Chloe Sterling moved. A waitress, not the head waiter, not the sommelier, not the manager, but a simple waitress who was meant to be invisible. 26 years old, with eyes that held a quiet weariness and a grace that came from balancing countless plates and expectations she had been serving the adjacent table. She had heard every word, felt every tremor of the billionaire's rage. She was supposed to clear her table, keep her head down, and let the manager handle the explosion. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do. She had rent to pay and a life that couldn't afford a single ripple, let alone a tsunami like Khalid al-Jamil. But she had also seen something else. Beneath the volcanic anger, she saw a flicker of profound pain in his eyes. It was a look she recognized. It was the look of a man who wasn't just angry at the world, but wounded by it. She had lived in Riyadh for 10 years as a child, her father an engineer on a major urban development project. She hadn't just learned the language. She had absorbed the culture, the nuances, the proverbs, and the deep-seated importance of honor and respect. As Khalid turned to leave his formidable back to the room, Chloe took a small, steadying breath. She stepped forward past the petrified Mr. Davies. Her colleagues stared winged-eyed, certain she was about to be fired in the most spectacular fashion. She did not address his anger about the fish. She did not apologize for the restaurant. She spoke softly, her voice clear and steady in the suffocating silence. She spoke in an Arabic that was not the formal classical language of news anchors, but the warm, nuanced cadence of the Najd region, the very heartland of Saudi Arabia, where his family was from. "Al-karam fil wajh ya sheikh," she said. "Generosity is written on the face, O sheikh." It was a simple poetic proverb, a phrase one's grandmother might say. It was intimate, respectful, and utterly, shockingly unexpected. Khalid al-Jamil froze. His entire body went rigid. His hand, which had been gesturing dismissively, stopped mid-air. He didn't turn around immediately. It was as if the words, spoken in a flawless, familiar accent, by a voice he had never heard, had erected an invisible wall in front of him. The sound of a London waitress speaking his mother tongue was improbable. The sound of her speaking it, with the accent of his childhood home, was impossible. His bodyguard looked at him confused. Mr. Davies stared at Chloe as if she had just sprouted wings. The entire restaurant held its breath. Slowly, deliberately, as if resisting a magnetic pull, Khalid al-Jamil turned around. His furious mask was gone. In its place was a look of profound, absolute astonishment. His dark eyes locked onto Chloe's, and for the first time that night, the billionaire looked utterly and completely silenced. The silence that followed Chloe's words was heavier than the fury that preceded it. Time seemed to warp in the gilded lyre. For Chloe, it felt like an eternity as the full weight of Khalid al-Jamil's gaze settled upon her. It was an intense, analytical stare, as if he were trying to deconstruct a complex equation. The anger had receded from his eyes, replaced by a piercing curiosity that was in its own way just as intimidating. "Repeat what you said," he commanded. His voice had lost its harsh edge, but it now carried the immense gravity of his full attention. Chloe's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. The rational part of her brain was screaming, "What have you done? You've overstepped. You've insulted him. You're fired." But the part of her that remembered dusty afternoons in Riyadh, the kindness of her childhood neighbors, and the deep respect for elders ingrained in her, held her steady. She met his gaze directly, a feat Mr. Davies had failed to accomplish all evening. "I said," she repeated her Arabic, just as fluid and natural as before, "Al-karam fil wajh ya sheikh." Forgive me if I was improper. I only meant that the frustration I saw did not match the face of the man I was looking at. It was a masterful deflection, respectful, and yet deeply personal. She wasn't just translating the proverb. She was explaining her intent, showing that she understood not just the words, but the cultural soul behind them. Khalid's aide, a younger man named Faisal, who had been silent until now, took a half step forward, his expression a mixture of shock and concern. "Sir," Khalid raised a single commanding hand, silencing him without a glance. He took a step closer to Chloe, ignoring the manager who now seemed to have shrunk into the plush carpeting. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" he asked, his English returning, but now laced with a quiet intensity. "Not from a book, not from a university course in London." "I grew up in Riyadh, sir," Chloe answered simply. "My father was an engineer with Bechtel working on the Kingdom Centre project. We lived there for 10 years. The mention of the iconic Riyadh skyscraper, a project he knew intimately, was another small shock. He was no longer looking at a waitress. He was looking at a ghost from a past and a place he thought he had left behind in London. He saw a young Englishwoman in a black uniform, but he heard the echo of home. The carefully constructed walls he maintained between his business life in the West and his roots in the East had been unexpectedly breached. He studied her for another long moment. He saw the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the determined set of her jaw. She wasn't fawning or intimidated. She was simply present. In a world of sycophants and yes-men, her quiet, direct dignity was as startling as her accent. He made a decision. It was swift, unconventional, and entirely characteristic of the man who built his empire on gut feelings. He turned to the still frozen Mr. Davies. "The fish is forgotten, but my evening is ruined. I will not be staying." He then looked at his entourage. "Faisal, you and the security team wait for me in the car. I wish to speak with this young lady. Alone." Faisal's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. An order like that was unheard of. Khalid al-Jamil did not have private, unscheduled meetings with waitstaff. "Sir, is that wise?" "It is what I have decided." Khalid stated the finality in his tone, leaving no room for argument. His team, ever professional, melted away. The bodyguards were the last to leave, their eyes lingering on Chloe for a second too long, as if trying to assess a threat they couldn't comprehend. Soon the alcove at table 7 was occupied by only 2 people, the billionaire magnate and the waitress who had dared to speak to him. The rest of the restaurant staff, under a sharp glare from Mr. Davies, began to cautiously resume their duties, though the air of normalcy was a fragile facade. Khalid gestured to the chair opposite his. "Please, sit." Chloe hesitated. "Sir, I'm on duty." "You are not," he said, his voice leaving no room for debate. "For the next 10 minutes, you are my guest." With a feeling of unreality, Chloe sat down at the table she had only ever approached to serve. She smoothed her apron, her hands trembling slightly. "Your name?" he asked. "Chloe. Chloe Sterling." "Chloe Sterling," he repeated, tasting the name. "And you lived in my country. You understand our ways." "I believe so, sir. I was young, but I remember it fondly. The people were very kind to my family." He leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "Today I was dealt a heavy blow, a betrayal in business of the worst kind, by a man I trusted, an Englishman, as it happens." He paused, his eyes searching her face. "My entire legacy project, a solar energy initiative that would power a new city, is in jeopardy. I came here tonight to quiet the noise in my head. Instead, I found more incompetence, more disappointment." Chloe listened, her heart aching with a surprising pang of empathy for this incredibly powerful yet clearly wounded man. She said nothing, sensing that he didn't want platitudes. He wanted to be heard. "What you did," he continued, "was either incredibly foolish or incredibly brave. You saw a storm, and you walked directly into it." "Why?" Chloe thought for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Because the storm wasn't about the fish, sir, and the proverbs I learned as a child. They are about looking past the storm to see the man. I apologize if I presumed too much." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Khalid's lips for the first time. It transformed his severe face, hinting at a warmth buried deep beneath the surface. "You presumed correctly," he said. He sat back, a new idea taking root in his mind, an idea born of desperation and instinct. The man who had betrayed him, his long-time British consultant, had used a deep understanding of Western corporate culture to manipulate the deal, weaving a web of legal and financial complexities that Khalid's own team had failed to anticipate. He had been outmaneuvered not by numbers, but by nuance. Perhaps he thought the solution was to fight fire with fire. He needed a bridge, not just a translator, but someone who understood both worlds from the inside out. Someone who could see what his own people, blinded by their perspective, could not. "Miss Sterling," he began, his tone shifting from personal to professional with breathtaking speed. "This job you have, waiting tables, is it your passion, your life's ambition?" Chloe was taken aback by the question. "No, sir. It pays the bills. I was studying art history, but I had to stop. Family reasons." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Family reasons was a polite euphemism for her father's financial ruin and subsequent disappearance from her life. "I see." Khalid's eyes held a sudden sharp glint of opportunity. "I find myself in need of a consultant, someone with a unique skill set, a fluency not just in language but in culture, both of ours. The work would be demanding. The stakes are higher than you can imagine. But the compensation would ensure you never have to wait another table in your life." Chloe stared at him, her mind struggling to keep up. Was he offering her a job? A man she'd met 10 minutes ago? A man she had provoked in the middle of a tantrum? It sounded insane. "Sir, I don't understand. What would I be doing?" "You would be listening," Khalid said, standing up. "You would be observing, and you would be telling me what I am missing. You would be my bridge." He pulled a sleek black business card from his jacket. It was heavy, the lettering embossed in simple, elegant silver. "My assistant Faisal will be in contact to arrange a proper meeting. Be at the address on this card tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock sharp." He placed the card on the table between them. It lay there, a stark rectangle of black against the white linen, representing an impossible choice. "I do not make offers twice, Miss Sterling," he said, his voice once again the cool, commanding tone of a CEO. "I hope for your sake you are as brave as you appeared to be a few minutes ago." And with that, Khalid Al-Jamil turned and walked out of the Gilded Lyre, leaving Chloe Sterling sitting alone at his table. The entire restaurant watching her, and a single business card holding the weight of a future she could never have imagined. The address on the business card wasn't an office building. It was for the Corinthia Hotel, and the card specified the Royal Penthouse. Chloe stood before the grand entrance the next morning, feeling as though she were from another planet. Her best black trousers and a simple white blouse, which had felt professional and smart in her small flat in Clapham, now seemed woefully inadequate. The doorman, draped in a magnificent uniform, eyed her with polite suspicion until she uttered the name Al-Jamil. The effect was instantaneous. His posture straightened, and he ushered her inside with a deferential, "Of course, miss. Right this way." She was escorted to a private elevator that whisked her silently to the top floor. The doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer. The space was breathtaking, a 2-story cavern of glass, marble, and steel, with a panoramic view that stretched from the London Eye to the BT Tower. The city lay sprawled below them like a detailed map. Faisal Khalid's aide from the restaurant greeted her. Dressed in a razor-sharp suit, he was polite but formal, his eyes giving nothing away. "Miss Sterling, thank you for coming. Mr. Al-Jamil will be with you shortly. Can I offer you some coffee?" "Water." "Water would be lovely, thank you," Chloe said, her voice steadier than she felt. As Faisal attended to the drink, she walked towards the immense floor-to-ceiling windows. London looked so quiet from up here, the frantic energy of its streets reduced to a silent, flowing river of red buses and black cabs. It was a perspective of power, a vantage point from which the world and its problems seemed small and manageable. "It is a beautiful city, but it can also be treacherous." Khalid's voice came from behind her. He had entered so silently she hadn't noticed. He wasn't in a suit, but in a simple yet clearly expensive white linen shirt and dark trousers. He looked rested, the fury of the previous night completely gone, replaced by a calm, focused energy. "It all depends on your vantage point, I suppose," Chloe replied, turning to face him. "Precisely," he said, gesturing for her to sit on one of the plush white sofas. "From down there on the street, one must watch for every threat. The speeding car, the thief, the rival. From up here, one can see everything coming. That is what I am offering you, Miss Sterling. A new vantage point." He sat opposite her, as Faisal placed a crystal glass of water on the table. With a nod from his boss, the aide retreated to a discreet distance, leaving them to their conversation. "I will be direct," Khalid began. "The project I mentioned is called the Asyad Project. It is the cornerstone of my country's future energy plans, a network of solar farms in the Rub al-Khali Desert, powering a new smart city. It is my legacy. My partner in this venture was a British consulting firm, Sterling Cross Capital, led by a man named Robert Sterling. I trusted him for 10 years. He advised my company, Al-Jamil Enterprises, on all our Western investments." Chloe's blood ran cold. Sterling. The name hit her like a physical blow. It couldn't be. It was a common name. A coincidence. Her mind raced desperately, trying to dismiss the connection. Her father's name was Robert Sterling. He was a consultant, an engineer turned financier who had worked on international projects. But he had lost everything years ago. He had vanished from her life after a bitter falling out, leaving her and her mother to pick up the pieces. It couldn't be him. She forced herself to remain calm, to keep her expression neutral. "What happened?" she asked, her voice a little too tight. "He used my trust against me," Khalid said, his voice laced with cold fury. "He structured the contracts in such a way that at the last minute he could leverage a series of legal loopholes and environmental clauses he himself recommended we include to stall the project indefinitely. He then used that leverage to attempt a hostile takeover of the entire technology patent portfolio associated with the project. He didn't just want a bigger piece of the pie. He wanted to steal the entire bakery." Khalid stood up and paced in front of the window. "My lawyers are good, the best in Riyadh, but they think like Saudis. They do not understand the subtle poison of British corporate law. The old boys' network, the unspoken rules of the game here. Sterling played me perfectly. He used our culture's emphasis on a man's word and honor against me, all while hiding behind a mountain of Western legal jargon. He stopped and turned to face her. That is where you come in. I don't need another lawyer. I need a new perspective. I want to hire you, Miss Sterling. Your official title will be Special Consultant for Cross-Cultural Strategy. You will have access to all the project documents. You will sit in on my meetings with my legal team. Your job is to read, listen, and tell me what they are not seeing. You grew up in my world, but you were born in his. You are the bridge. You can translate not just the language, but the intent. The offer was staggering. The implications were terrifying. If this Robert Sterling was indeed her father, she would be hired to help destroy him. If he wasn't, it was just an unnerving coincidence. But her gut screamed at her. The ambition, the ruthlessness. It sounded exactly like the man she remembered. Why me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Based on a proverb and 10 minutes in a restaurant. Do not underestimate those 10 minutes, Khalid said firmly. In those 10 minutes you showed more perception and courage than my entire executive team has shown in the last month. You were not afraid of my anger. You saw the root of the problem. That is a rare skill. I am a man who has built an empire on trusting my instincts, and my instincts tell me you are the key. He named a salary that made Chloe's head spin. It was more money than she had ever imagined earning in a decade, let alone a year. It was enough to pay off her student loans, find a new apartment, and live without the constant grinding fear of financial ruin. It was freedom. But what would it cost her? I need to read the initial contract. She found herself saying the words coming out before she could stop them. And the profile of the man who betrayed you, Robert Sterling. A flicker of respect showed in Khalid's eyes. She wasn't simply dazzled by the money. Of course, Faisal will provide you with a preliminary file and a non-disclosure agreement. You can review it here. Take all the time you need. He motioned to his aide. Faisal approached with a tablet and a slim leather-bound folder. He placed them on the table in front of Chloe. The NDA is standard, Faisal said coolly. What you read in this file is not to leave this room, whether you accept the position or not. Chloe nodded, her hands clammy. She signed the document with a pen that felt heavier than a brick. Then, with a deep, trembling breath, she opened the tablet. The first document was a corporate profile of Sterling Cross Capital, and there on the screen was a professional headshot. Her world tilted on its axis. The face was older, the dark hair now streaked with grey at the temples, the lines around the eyes deeper. But it was him. It was unmistakably her father, Robert Sterling. The same confident, calculating smile that had always seemed to hide more than it revealed. The man who had promised her the world and then disappeared when his own came crashing down. He hadn't lost everything. He had reinvented himself. He had risen higher than ever before. And in his ascent, he had tried to ruin Khalid al-Jamil. Chloe felt a wave of nausea. She looked up from the screen, her eyes wide with a secret terror, and met Khalid's intense, expectant gaze. He was offering her a golden key to a new life. But to use it, she would have to help him lock the door on her own father's world, and she had no idea what monsters lay on either side. For a long moment, Chloe couldn't breathe. The air in the penthouse, once filled with the promise of opportunity, now felt thin and suffocating. The face on the screen was a spectre from a life she had tried to bury. Her father, the man whose absence had been a defining feature of her young adulthood. The man whose last words to her during a bitter phone call after he lost their family home were, "You have to be a predator in this world, Chloe, or you become prey. I just chose the wrong hunt." It seemed he had found a new one. "Is something wrong, Miss Sterling?" Khalid's voice cut through her paralysis. He had noticed the change in her, the sudden pallor of her skin, the way her hand trembled slightly as it rested on the tablet. Chloe's mind raced a chaotic whirlwind of panic and preservation. Tell him right now. He's my father." "I can't do this." The words formed in her throat, but died before they could escape. What would he do? Would he throw her out, disgusted by the association? Would he suspect her of being a spy, of being in league with her father? The life-altering opportunity would vanish, and she would be left with nothing but a dangerous secret. Another voice, colder and more calculating, a voice that sounded disturbingly like her father's, whispered a different path. "Say nothing. You owe him nothing. He abandoned you. This man Khalid is offering you a way out. Use it. Use what you know." She forced her expression into a mask of professional focus, a skill she'd honed over years of dealing with difficult customers. "No, sir. Nothing is wrong." She lied, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "I'm just absorbing the scale of the betrayal. It's audacious." Khalid nodded, accepting her explanation. "Audacious is one word for it. Now you see why I need a different kind of weapon in this war." "I accept your offer," Chloe said, the decision solidifying even as it terrified her. She was stepping off a cliff, not knowing if she would fly or fall. A look of satisfaction settled on Khalid's features. "Excellent. Faisal will handle the formalities of your contract and accommodations. You will have a suite here at the hotel. You start immediately. I want you to read everything, every email, every contract, every addendum. I want you to live inside this project until you know it better than I do." The next few days were a blur. Chloe was plunged into the heart of Al Jamil Enterprises' London operation. Her life in the cramped Clapham flat became a distant memory, replaced by the opulent, sterile silence of her hotel suite. Days were spent in a glass-walled conference room, surrounded by Khalid's legal team, a group of sharp, serious men who initially viewed her with thinly veiled skepticism. She was the Waitress consultant, an eccentric whim of their boss. Chloe said little in those first meetings. She listened. She absorbed the complex language of international finance and contract law, and she read. She devoured thousands of pages of documents, her past study of art history, the discipline of finding meaning in details, of understanding context and provenance, giving her a unique lens. But she wasn't just reading legal text. She was reading her father. In the precise, predatory wording of the clauses he had drafted, she recognized his voice. She saw his ambition, his meticulous planning, his utter ruthlessness. He had always been a brilliant strategist, a grand master of chess who saw people as pieces on a board. She remembered him teaching her the game as a child, his constant refrain being, "Think 10 moves ahead. Chloe, always control the center." In these contracts, she could see him controlling the center, laying traps months, even years in advance. She began to see the patterns his Saudi legal team had missed, not because they weren't smart, but because they didn't know the man. They saw a business adversary. Chloe saw a ghost. One evening, buried under a mountain of files in her suite, she found it. It was a sub-clause in an environmental impact assessment report attached to an appendix that was hundreds of pages long. It seemed innocuous, It stipulated that any discovery of potential archaeological significance on the proposed construction site would trigger an immediate and indefinite project halt, pending a full investigation by a UNESCO-affiliated panel. Khalid's team had dismissed it as standard boilerplate. But Chloe knew her father. He was not a man who cared for history or archaeology. He only cared for leverage. She cross-referenced the coordinates of the proposed solar farm site with geological and historical survey maps. It took hours, but she found what she was looking for, a series of old academic papers speculating about the location of a lost city of the Ubar civilization, the so-called Atlantis of the Sands. The speculated location was right on the edge of Khalid's proposed site. It was a long shot, a fringe theory, but it was enough. Her father hadn't just relied on legal loopholes. He had planted a cultural bomb, a trigger that would mire the project in an international heritage dispute, a public relations nightmare that the Saudi government would be desperate to avoid. He would use the delay to bleed Khalid dry and seize the patents. It was brilliant, it was diabolical, and it was pure Robert Sterling. At that moment, she felt a profound sense of cold clarity. She was not helping a stranger against another stranger. She was caught in a war between two titans, one of whom was her own flesh and blood. And she was the only person in the world who understood the enemy's strategy. The next morning, she walked into the conference room and interrupted the lead counsel mid-sentence. "You're looking in the wrong place," she said, her voice clear and firm, cutting through the legal jargon. All eyes turned to her. The skepticism was still there, but now it was mixed with curiosity. She walked to the head of the table where Khalid was sitting, his face an impassive mask. She placed the archaeological survey map next to the environmental impact report. "Mr. Al-Jamil," she began, "your problem isn't in the financial contracts. It's buried in the sand." She proceeded to lay out her discovery, connecting the obscure clause to the academic theories explaining the cultural and political leverage it would give her father. She spoke of his methods, his way of thinking, not revealing how she knew, but presenting it as a logical analysis. "This man doesn't fight on one front," she explained. "He creates a multi-front war. He attacks your finances, your legal standing, and your reputation all at once. You've been focused on the legal and financial battle, but the reputational attack is the one he will use to deliver the killing blow." As she spoke, the atmosphere in the room changed. The lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. Faisal stared at her, his professional reserve finally cracking to reveal a look of sheer astonishment. Khalid remained silent, his eyes fixed on her, listening to every word. When she finished, a long silence hung in the air. He finally looked away from her and at his lead counsel. "Did any of you see this?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The lawyer, a proud and decorated man, could only stammer, "No, sir. We considered it a negligible risk." "A negligible risk," Khalid repeated flatly. He turned his gaze back to Chloe, and for the first time she saw something more than curiosity in his eyes. It was a deep, profound respect. "You have just saved us months of time and millions of dollars, Miss Sterling." He stood up. "The old strategy is dead. From now on, we follow a new one. We will listen to Miss Sterling." In that moment, Chloe was no longer the Waitress consultant. She was the lead strategist in a multi-billion-dollar corporate war. And her primary weapon was the intimate, painful knowledge of the man she was trying to destroy, her own father. The balance of power in Khalid al-Jamil's inner circle shifted overnight. Chloe was no longer a peripheral figure. She was at the epicenter. Khalid moved her from the conference room to his private office in the penthouse where they worked side by side, often late into the night, poring over maps, financial projections, and psychological profiles of the key players at Sterling Cross Capital. It was a strange, intense intimacy. Chloe learned the rhythms of his day, the strong, unsweetened coffee he drank at dawn, the way he would fall silent and stare out at the city, when deep in thought the faint scent of oud that clung to his clothes. He in turn began to rely on her for more than just strategy. He started to ask for her opinion on other matters, valuing her clear, unvarnished perspective. He opened up to her in small, unguarded moments. He spoke of his late wife, Layla, who had died years ago. He described her as the anchor of his life, and confessed that since her passing, his work had become a fortress to keep the grief at bay. He spoke of his vision for the Asiad project, not as a source of profit, but as a promise to her a way to build a better future. She believed that power was a responsibility, not a privilege, he told Chloe one evening, as they watched the city lights ignite below them. She would have despised a man like Robert Sterling, who uses his brilliance only to acquire, never to build. Every word was a small dagger in Chloe's heart. The guilt was a constant, heavy cloak. She was earning this man's trust, his respect, even his friendship, all while harboring a monumental secret. She was using the memories of her childhood, the games of chess, the overheard conversations, the understanding of her father's psychology as weapons in this corporate war. Her insights were devastatingly effective. "My father, I mean Sterling," she corrected herself quickly, her heart skipping a beat, "is a narcissist. He needs to be the smartest man in the room. He will have planned for you to fight back legally. He wants that. It's a battle he knows how to win. What he won't expect is for you to ignore him." "Ignore him?" Khalid asked, intrigued. "He is holding my legacy hostage." "Don't fight him on the UNESCO clause," Chloe advised. "Embrace it. Announce publicly that in light of potential archaeological sensitivities identified by your own due diligence, your diligence not his, you are proactively funding a state-of-the-art archaeological survey of the region. Frame it as Al-Jamil Enterprises being a custodian of national heritage. You'll be praised for it. You'll take his weapon and turn it into a shield. He can't use a threat that you've already neutralized and turned into good publicity." Khalid was stunned by the audacity of the plan. It was counterintuitive, expensive, and brilliant. He put the plan into motion. The press release was picked up by international news agencies. Khalid was lauded for his corporate responsibility. In a single move, Robert Sterling's hidden leverage was rendered useless. Chloe's next insight was even more personal. He surrounds himself with people who are competent, but not as smart as he is. His second-in-command, a man named David Chen. My father would have cultivated a sense of dependency in him. Chen is likely the one doing the real work, but Sterling takes the credit. If you put enough pressure on the company, Sterling will sacrifice Chen to save himself. Acting on this, Khalid's legal team initiated a targeted legal action aimed directly at the division. Chen managed citing specific contractual irregularities Chloe had identified. The pressure was immense. As Chloe predicted, Sterling Cross Capital began to show cracks. Robert Sterling was being outmaneuvered, and he couldn't understand how. Khalid Al-Jamil, who he had seen as a straightforward, if powerful foreign businessman, was suddenly playing corporate chess with the skill of a grandmaster. The moves were subtle, creative, and seemed to anticipate his own strategy before he even enacted it. He felt like he was fighting a shadow, someone who knew his playbook page by page. He grew paranoid, suspicious of everyone on his team. For Chloe, the success was terrifying. She lived on a razor's edge. A single slip of the tongue referring to Sterling as my father, revealing a detail she couldn't possibly know from the documents alone, would bring everything crashing down. The stress was immense. She had nightmares of Khalid's warm respect, turning to cold fury. The same fury she had witnessed in the restaurant, but this time directed at her. One afternoon, Khalid found her staring blankly at a spreadsheet, her face pale and drawn. "You are carrying a heavy burden, Chloe," he said gently, his voice startling her. He had started using her first name in their private meetings. "The work is demanding," she deflected. "It is more than that," he insisted, his dark eyes searching her face. "I have asked you to walk into the mind of a very dark man. It is taking its toll. Perhaps we should take a break this evening. There is a private concert at the Barbican Center. A friend of mine is conducting. It would be good for you to see something beautiful after staring at so much ugliness." The offer was personal, a clear line being crossed from a purely professional relationship. Part of her, the lonely young woman who hadn't had a real friend in years, desperately wanted to accept. But the other part, the part that housed her terrible secret, screamed that it was a mistake. Getting closer to Khalid only made her deception more profound, more painful. "I can't," she said more abruptly than she intended. "I need to finish reviewing these investment portfolios." A flicker of disappointment crossed his face, but he masked it quickly. "As you wish. Do not work too late." He left the office and Chloe buried her face in her hands. The isolation was crushing her. She was succeeding beyond her wildest dreams, but she was utterly terrifyingly alone, trapped between a past she couldn't escape and a future built on a lie. She was winning a war for a man she admired by betraying the blood of a man she despised, and she was starting to lose herself in the process. The razor's edge was cutting deeper every day. Robert Sterling was a man cornered, and cornered men are dangerous. His meticulously planned corporate assault on Khalid al-Jamil was not just failing. It was being systematically dismantled with an unnerving prescience. Every strategy was anticipated, every trap disarmed. It felt as if his opponent could read his mind, and the sensation was maddening. Consumed by a gnawing paranoia, he did what he always did when threatened. He gathered intelligence. He hired a discreet private investigator, tasking him with one simple objective: identify the brain behind al-Jamil's new strategy. The report that landed on his desk was thin, but its contents were explosive. It contained surveillance photos of Khalid's inner circle, and one face stood out. It was a young woman, identified as a new consultant named Chloe Sterling, whose previous job was listed as a waitress. Robert stared at the grainy photo of his daughter's face, and the world tilted on its axis. Chloe. It was impossible. He hadn't seen her in 3 years, not since his own financial ruin had shattered their family. And now she was here, allied with his enemy, the architect of his downfall. The betrayal felt absolute, a dagger forged from his own blood. He didn't wait. 2 evenings later, as Chloe stepped out of the Corinthia Hotel for a breath of crisp night air, a black sedan slid silently to the curb. The tinted rear window glided down, revealing the face she hadn't seen outside of her nightmares. "Get in the car, Chloe," Robert Sterling said. His voice was unnaturally calm, which made it all the more menacing. She froze, her heart seizing in her chest. "I have nothing to say to you." She turned to retreat into the safety of the hotel. "If you walk away," he called after her, his voice rising slightly, "I will have this conversation in the hotel lobby. I am certain, Mr. Al-Jamil would be fascinated to learn the true identity of his brilliant new consultant. It was a perfect trap. He had always known how to corner her. Defeated, she opened the car door and slid inside. The opulent leather interior felt suffocating, filled with the scent of his cologne and years of unspoken resentment. The car pulled silently into the stream of London traffic. "How could you?" He began, his voice a low hiss of fury. "My own daughter, conspiring with him against me. Tell me, what was the price for your loyalty? How much did he pay you to forget your own name?" A surge of long-suppressed anger burned away her fear. "You want to talk about loyalty?" She shot back, her voice trembling but strong. "You who vanished when your own risks blew up in your face, you who left us to pick up the pieces of the life you broke, you don't get to use the words family or loyalty with me. You surrendered that right years ago." The truth of her words hit him, but he deflected his tactics, shifting instantly from aggression to manipulation. The anger in his face was replaced by a mask of paternal concern she knew all too well. He reached across the seat and placed a hand on hers. She flinched. "Chloe, listen," he said, his voice now soft and persuasive. "That was a mistake, and I've paid for it. But this is our chance to get it all back. We're the same, you and I. We're survivors. This Al-Jamil is just using you for your insight. When he's done, he'll discard you. But you are my blood. We can win this together. Just tell me his next move. That's all I need. Everything I gain, half of it, will be yours. A real legacy for our family." It was the same hollow promise he had always made, a kingdom built on a foundation of sand. She looked at his desperate eyes and saw not a father, but a frightened man terrified of losing. In that moment, a profound and sorrowful clarity washed over her. The guilt and fear she had carried for weeks vanished. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled her hand from beneath his. "The difference between us," she said, her voice steady and clear, "is that you think winning is all that matters. I've learned that how you win is what defines you." She turned to the driver. "Stop the car." Robert stared at her, disbelief warring with rage. He had played his final card, and it had failed. "You're a fool," he snarled, the mask of charm gone completely. "You're choosing him over your own father." "No," Chloe replied, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. "I'm choosing myself." She opened the door and stepped out onto the pavement. She didn't look back as the black car sped away, disappearing into the river of taillights. The confrontation she had dreaded had come, and it had not broken her. It had set her free. She turned and began the walk back to the hotel, her purpose clear. The game was over. It was time to tell Khalid everything. Chloe walked back into the Corinthia, not with the fear of an employee, but with the quiet resolve of a woman who had made her choice. She found Khalid in his penthouse office, a dark silhouette against the vast, glittering expanse of the London skyline. He turned as she entered, a welcoming smile on his face that quickly faded as he registered her solemn expression. "Chloe, what has happened?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "I have to tell you the truth," she began, her voice steady, despite the frantic beating of her heart. "Something I should have told you the day we met. Please just hear all of it." He gestured to a chair, his full undivided attention on her. As they sat opposite each other, the truth spilled out. "Robert Sterling is my father," she said, the words hanging in the air between them. She explained everything. The painful estrangement after his financial collapse. The shock of seeing his face in the file and the lie of omission she had maintained out of fear and a desperate desire for the opportunity he was offering. She recounted every detail of the confrontation that had just occurred, her father's manipulative plea for her to betray Khalid, and her absolute refusal. When she finished, she looked him in the eye, fully prepared for the explosion of rage she had once witnessed. Khalid remained silent for a long moment, his gaze intense and analytical. He was processing every word, re-evaluating every interaction, every brilliant insight she'd had. He wasn't seeing a deceiver, but a woman who had been walking a razor's edge, fighting a war, both for him and within herself. "You deceived me," he finally said, his voice level and devoid of emotion. Her heart sank. "You placed my entire legacy at risk by hiding this connection. By all rights, I should end your employment this instant." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "However," he continued, his tone shifting when faced with an ultimate test, a choice between blood and honor, "you chose honor. Your father came to you to betray me, and instead you have come to me to betray his secret. In doing so, you have not lost my trust. You have finally and completely earned it." A wave of relief so profound it left Chloe light-headed, washed over her. The heavy cloak of her secret had finally been lifted. "He is desperate and blind," Khalid stated, standing up, his energy now focused and formidable. "It is time to end this. Together." The final move was not a direct financial assault, but an elegant trap designed by Chloe to prey on the one vulnerability she knew her father could not control: his own ego. Instead of attacking his company, they laid a trail of sophisticated false information. The breadcrumbs leaked through trusted channels hinted at a critical weakness in Al Jamil Enterprises' financial structure, a golden opportunity for a hostile takeover, an opportunity too perfect for a narcissist like Robert to resist. Blinded by arrogance and his desperate need for a final victory, Robert Sterling took the bait. He poured all of his company's liquid capital and took on immense loans to launch his attack, believing he was about to seize the crown from a wounded king. The trap was sprung in the sterile quiet of a Mayfair boardroom at a meeting Robert himself had called to announce his triumph. Instead of a broken Khalid, he was met by Khalid Chloe and a team of forensic accountants. They calmly revealed that the weakness was a fiction and that his buyout attempt was based on manufactured premises. In the same breath, Khalid revealed his checkmate move. While Robert was busy chasing ghosts, Khalid had quietly purchased all of his company's outstanding debt. In a single brilliant stroke, Robert Sterling was ruined. He hadn't just lost the deal, he had lost everything. He was financially and professionally destroyed, a predator caught in a snare he never saw. He stared across the polished table, his face ashen first at the implacable gaze of Khalid, and then at his daughter. Chloe met his eyes not with triumph, but with a quiet, sorrowful finality. That moment marked the end of one life for Chloe, and the true beginning of another. In the months that followed, as the new director of Western strategy for Al Jamil Enterprises, she oversaw the triumphant relaunch of the Asiad project. Her relationship with Khalid had evolved into a powerful and respectful partnership, forged in crisis and solidified by trust. She was no longer the invisible waitress or the daughter of a disgraced man. She was a woman who had faced down her past, chosen her own code of honor, and built a future she had earned, not inherited. Chloe's story reminds us that the most powerful people aren't always the ones with the most money or the loudest voice. Sometimes it's the person who listens, the person who sees beyond the surface, the person who holds on to their integrity, when it would be easier to let it go. She started as a waitress, invisible to the world, but by using her unique past and her inner strength, she changed her own destiny and the future of a billion-dollar legacy. Her story is a testament to the fact that your circumstances don't define you. Your choices do. Even in your darkest moments, a single act of courage, a single moment of truth can change everything. If this story of courage, secrets, and redemption moved you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own hidden strength. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story about the incredible moments that change lives forever. Thank you for listening. What if the person making your life a living hell was the one person who should have loved you the most? For 22-year-old Elara Vance, a struggling artist trapped in a waitress uniform. A new customer wasn't just another difficult order. He was a storm, a billionaire named Alistair Sterling, a man whose arrogance was as legendary as his fortune. Every condescending word, every impossible demand felt like a personal attack. But Elara had no idea that the cruelty in his eyes masked a secret that would shatter her world, a secret tied to a silver locket around her neck and a past her mother refused to speak of. This isn't just a story about a waitress and a billionaire. It's about a daughter and a father, separated by lies and brought together by fate in the most unlikely of places. The air in the Gilded Spoon was a familiar symphony of chaos, the clatter of cutlery against porcelain, the hiss of the espresso machine, the low hum of conversations weaving together into a single indecipherable tapestry of sound. For Elara Vance, this symphony was the soundtrack of her life's intermission. By day, she was a waitress, her artist's hands accustomed to the delicate dance of a charcoal pencil, now expertly balancing trays laden with seared scallops and Cabernet Sauvignon. By night, in her tiny, drafty apartment, those same hands would try to sketch a future she so desperately craved, a world of color and canvas, far from the sticky floors and demanding patrons of downtown Boston. She was 22, with eyes the color of a stormy sea, and a resilience forged in the fires of financial hardship. Every dollar she earned was split 3 ways: rent for the apartment she shared with her chronically ill mother Sarah, a growing mountain of medical bills, and the meager remainder which she poured into art supplies that felt more like lifeblood than luxury. On a Tuesday that felt like any other, the storm arrived. He didn't walk in so much as he materialized, parting the restaurant's bustling crowd like a shark cutting through water. He was tall, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car, and carried an aura of such profound impatience that the air itself seemed to thin around him. His hair was a distinguished silver at the temples, his face etched with the sharp, unforgiving lines of a man who didn't ask for the world, but simply expected it to be handed to him. This was Alistair Sterling, founder and CEO of Sterling Industries, a titan of finance whose face was a regular feature on the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. He was seated in Elara's section. Of course he was. "I need a table, by the window. Now," he said to the hostess, not as a request, but as a statement of fact. "Sir, there's a 20-minute wait for window seating, but I can—" "No," he cut her off, his voice a low, dismissive rumble. "You don't understand. I am sitting there." He pointed to a two-top that was still being cleared. The hostess, a flustered teenager named Maya, looked to Elara with panicked eyes. Elara pasted on her professional smile, a fragile armor she wore every shift. "Right this way, sir. We're just resetting it for you." As he sat, he didn't thank her. He didn't even look at her. He pulled out his phone, his thumb swiping across the screen with predatory speed. Elara placed the menu on the table. He ignored it. "I'll have a black coffee. Espresso. Lavazza, if you have it. If not, don't bother. And it needs to be 190 degrees Fahrenheit. Not 189, not 191. Use a thermometer. I'll also have the steak tartare. Tell the chef no capers. I despise them. And the egg yolk had better be perfectly centered and unbroken." Elara's pen hovered over her notepad. "Of course, sir. And for your main course." He finally looked up, and his eyes, a cold, piercing blue, made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Do I look like a man with time for a main course? This is it. Be quick about it." He waved his hand, a gesture of dismissal, and his attention was once again consumed by his phone. Elara retreated to the kitchen, her composure fraying. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered to Chloe, another waitress. "Table 7, Alistair Sterling. He wants his coffee temperature checked and his egg yolk geometrically perfect." Chloe whistled. "Good luck. I heard he once tried to sue a valet for leaving a fingerprint on his steering wheel. He's a nightmare." Elara delivered the coffee, having personally stood over the barista, with the kitchen's meat thermometer feeling utterly ridiculous. He took a sip without looking up. "Passable," he grunted. It was the highest compliment she would receive from him that day. The tartare was a masterpiece of culinary anxiety. The chef, a burly man named Gus, who normally feared no one had replated it 3 times to ensure the yolk was perfectly centered. Elara carried it to the table as if it were a bomb. Sterling stared at it for a long, agonizing moment. He poked at the meat with his fork, then at the yolk, which thankfully held its shape. He took a bite. Elara held her breath. "The toast points are uneven," he said flatly, gesturing to the 4 triangular pieces of bread. "One is clearly thicker than the others. Is this the level of mediocrity the Gilded Spoon strives for?" Elara's training screamed at her to apologize, to offer to fix it, to grovel. But something else, a deeper, more weary part of her took over. "I can assure you, sir, their flavor is uniformly excellent." The corner of his mouth twitched an almost imperceptible flicker of surprise. He held her gaze for a second longer than was comfortable, a flicker of something unreadable in his cold eyes. Then he broke the stare and finished his meal in a tense, methodical silence. When he was done, he pushed the plate away, the thicker toast point, left untouched in silent protest. Elara brought the bill. He placed a black credit card on the tray, the name A. Sterling embossed in silver. She ran the card and returned with the slip for him to sign. He scribbled a signature and stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. "The service was adequate." He said the word adequate, sounding like a grave insult from his lips. He strode out of the restaurant, leaving the same chill in the air as when he arrived. Elara walked over to the table to clear it, steeling herself for what she might find on the tip line. On a bill of $58, he had left exactly 0. But that wasn't the worst part. Scrawled at the bottom of the receipt in sharp, angry letters were 2 words. "Try harder." Elara stared at the note, a hot flush of anger and humiliation creeping up her neck. It wasn't just rude. It was personal. It was a dismissal of her effort, of her existence. She crumpled the receipt in her hand, the sharp corners digging into her palm. She didn't know it then, but this was not an ending. It was a declaration of war. And Alistair Sterling, for reasons he didn't even understand himself, was about to become a regular. The following Tuesday at precisely 12:30 p.m. He returned. Elara's stomach twisted into a knot the moment she saw him walk through the door. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on her section, and then with an unnerving sense of purpose, he walked directly to the same two-top by the window. He didn't wait for the hostess. He simply sat as if the table were his private property. "You again," he said, as Elara approached her notepad, a flimsy shield against his presence. "Let's hope for an improvement." "Welcome back to the Gilded Spoon, Mr. Sterling," she replied, her voice professionally level, betraying none of the dread churning within her. His orders became a ritual of torment. He would ask for obscure wines and then send them back, claiming they were corked when Elara knew they weren't. He would complain that his soup was tepid one week and scalding the next. He quizzed her on the origin of the sea bass, the marbling of the ribeye, the specific type of basil used in the pesto, all with the condescending air of a professor trying to expose a failing student. Each visit was a masterclass in psychological warfare. He never raised his voice. His cruelty was quiet, precise, and soul-crushingly effective. He seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to find her insecurities and press down hard. One afternoon, he noticed a faint smudge of charcoal on her wrist, a remnant from her late-night sketching session. "An artist," he'd sneered softly, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Let me guess, you're following your passion, a noble excuse for mediocrity in the real world. Passion doesn't pay the bills, results do." His words hit her like a physical blow, striking at the very core of her identity. How could a stranger know the exact nature of her deepest anxieties? The fear that she was just a cliché, a deluded dreamer, destined to serve tables for the rest of her life. She would go home after his visits drained and raw, the echo of his condescension ringing in her ears. She'd vent to her mother, Sarah, whose frail health confined her mostly to their small apartment. "He sounds like a monster, honey," Sarah would say, her voice thin but full of warmth as she sipped her herbal tea. "Don't let him get to you. People like that are just black holes of misery." But Elara couldn't shake it. There was something about him that was different from other rude customers. It felt targeted. One rainy Tuesday, about a month into his weekly campaign of torment, he ordered something that wasn't on the menu. "I want the fennel and orange salad with toasted pine nuts," he stated, not looking up from a stack of documents he'd spread across the table. Elara paused. "I'm sorry, sir, that isn't one of our current offerings." He finally looked at her. His blue eyes narrowed. "It used to be. Years ago. This restaurant was once called La Petite Lune. They made it here. Tell your chef to make it." "Sir, our kitchen is stocked for our current menu. I highly doubt we have the specific ingredients." "Then find them," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous command. "Consider it a test of your resourcefulness. I expect results, not excuses." Defeated Elara went to the kitchen. "Gus, you're not going to believe this," she began. Gus the chef threw his hands up. "Let me guess. Sterling wants us to source unicorn tears for his water." "Close. He wants a fennel and orange salad that was on the menu of a restaurant that existed here 10 years ago." Gus swore under his breath, but then he paused, a look of recognition on his face. "La Petite Lune. I remember that place. My first sous chef job. We did make a killer fennel salad." He thought for a moment. "You know what, I think I have a fennel bulb in the back I was saving for a special. And there are oranges. Go tell the monster he's in luck." When Alara placed the salad in front of Alistair Sterling, his reaction was not what she expected. He didn't critique it. He didn't complain. He simply stared at it for a full minute, his power broker facade dissolving into something else. Something distant. Lost. He picked up his fork and took a bite. As he chewed, his eyes glazed over as if he were tasting a memory. He was silent for the rest of the meal. When he left, he still didn't leave a tip, but the usual insulting note was absent. For Alara, the silence was more unnerving than the criticism. That night, she described the strange encounter to her mother. He knew the restaurant used to be called La Petite Lune, Alara said, flopping onto the worn armchair, and he ordered this weirdly specific salad, fennel and orange. The teacup in Sarah's hand trembled, rattling against the saucer. The color drained from her already pale face. "Mum, are you okay?" Alara asked, sitting up straight. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah forced a weak smile, but her eyes were wide with a fear Alara had never seen before. No, I'm fine, dear. Just a little dizzy." She clutched the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Fennel and orange, that was my favorite. Your father, he used to take me there. To La Petite Lune. It was our special place." Alara froze. Her father was a forbidden topic, a ghost who haunted the edges of their lives. All her mother would ever say was that he was a passionate, ambitious boy who wasn't ready for a family. She had no name, no face, nothing but a vague, romanticized tragedy. What did he look like, Mum?" Alara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah's eyes darted away, refusing to meet her daughter's gaze. "It was a long time ago, Alara. It doesn't matter now." She stood up, her movements unsteady. "I need to rest." As her mother shuffled off to her bedroom, Alara stood motionless in the middle of the living room. A cold, terrifying thought beginning to form in her mind. It was impossible. A coincidence. It had to be. But for the first time, she felt that the cruelty of Alistair Sterling wasn't random at all. It was a thread pulling at a tapestry of secrets she never knew existed. And she was standing right at the center of it. The seed of suspicion, once planted, began to sprout, twisting its roots around Alara's thoughts. Every interaction with Alistair Sterling was now filtered through this new, terrifying lens. She started noticing things she'd previously dismissed. The way he held his fork with his index finger extended along the top, a peculiar habit her mother had once idly mentioned, was a quirk of her long-lost love. The way his eyes in rare, unguarded moments held a profound, almost bottomless loneliness that felt strangely familiar. She started wearing the locket. It was her most prized possession, a small silver oval tarnished with age. The front was etched with a delicate pattern of intertwined vines. Inside one side was meant for a photo, a space that had remained hauntingly empty her entire life. Her mother had given it to her on her 16th birthday, her hands trembling as she fastened the delicate chain around Alara's neck. "This was from him," Sarah had whispered, her eyes misty. "It's all I have left of him." Alara wore it now as a test, a silent question aimed at the man who tormented her. She tucked it under her uniform, but made sure the chain was visible. She wanted to see if he would notice, if he would react. For 2 weeks, nothing. He continued his ritual of quiet cruelty, his eyes never straying to her collarbone. Alara began to feel foolish, her theory collapsing under the weight of his indifference. It was just a coincidence. Her mind was playing tricks on her, trying to weave a grand drama out of the mundane misery of her job. Then came the day of the storm, a real one this time. Rain lashed against the large windows of the Gilded Spoon, the ski a bruised purple. The restaurant was less crowded, the atmosphere more intimate and subdued. Alistair Sterling sat at his usual table, staring out at the downpour, a glass of untouched whiskey beside him. He seemed different today, his usual sharp edges softened by a contemplative gloom. Elara was refilling his water when she leaned over slightly. The locket, no longer tucked away, swung free from the collar of her uniform, catching the dim light of the overhead lamp. It dangled in the space between them for a mere second. Sterling's hand, which was reaching for his glass, froze mid-air. His gaze dropped from her face to the small silver oval. Every ounce of color drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly ashen pallor. The arrogant billionaire vanished, replaced by a man seeing a ghost. His breath hitched a small, strangled sound in the quiet restaurant. "Where?" he began, his voice a raw, cracked whisper she could barely hear over the rain. "Where did you get that?" Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The reaction. It was real. "It was a gift," she said, her own voice unsteady. "From my mother." His eyes, wide and disbelieving, shot up to meet hers. They weren't cold and piercing anymore. They were filled with a chaotic storm of emotions she couldn't decipher. Shock, pain, confusion, and something that looked terrifyingly like recognition. He looked at her face, truly looked at her as if for the first time. He scanned her features, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw, the stubborn set of her mouth. It was as if he was searching for something, a ghost in her living face. He abruptly pushed his chair back, the legs scraping violently against the hardwood floor. The sound was so jarring it turned heads at nearby tables. He threw a $100 bill onto the table, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. "I have to go," he muttered, not to her, but to the air itself. He practically fled from the restaurant without his coat out into the driving rain. Elara stood frozen, her hand instinctively clutching the now warm locket against her chest. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The $100 bill on the table was more than a tip. It was a surrender, a white flag from a man in full retreat. She finished her shift in a daze, her mind replaying that moment of raw, unmasked shock on his face over and over. The certainty was no longer a suspicion. It was a concrete weight in the pit of her stomach. That night, she didn't just ask her mother. She demanded. She found Sarah in the living room, reading by the dim light of a floor lamp. Elara walked over and stood in front of her, blocking the light. She held the locket out in her palm. "His name is Alistair Sterling," Elara said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and grief. "Isn't it?" Sarah looked at the locket, then up at her daughter's face, her expression crumbling. The years of carefully constructed denial, of evasions and half-truths, fell away, leaving only a raw, heart-breaking vulnerability. Tears welled in her eyes, silent and immediate. How did you?" "He's been coming into the restaurant, Mum. For weeks. He's been awful cruel. And today he saw this." Elara's voice broke. "He saw this locket, and he looked at me. He looked at me, and he knew." Sarah began to sob, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. It was the sound of a dam breaking, of 2 decades of secrets and sorrow flooding into the open. "I'm so sorry, Elara," she cried, reaching for her daughter's hand. "I never wanted you to meet him like this. I never wanted you to meet him at all." Elara sank to her knees in front of her mother's chair. the hard truth washing over her in a sickening wave. The monster from the restaurant, the cruel, condescending billionaire who made her feel worthless, the man who left insulting notes instead of tips. That man was her father. The small, cozy living room, usually a sanctuary of warmth and comfort, for Ilara suddenly felt like a put. The air was thick with unspoken words, with 22 years of a single, monumental lie. Sarah's sobs subsided into ragged, weary breaths. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her cardigan, her gaze fixed on a point in the middle distance, as if watching a film of her own past. "Tell me everything," Ilara said, her voice quiet but firm. "No more secrets, Mom. I deserve to know." Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze finally meeting Ilara's. It was the look of a woman who had carried a heavy burden for too long and was finally ready to set it down. "His name was Ali, then?" She began, her voice soft and distant. "Just Ali. He wasn't Alistair Sterling, the titan of industry. He was a boy from the wrong side of the tracks with a fire in his eyes that could either light up the world or burn it all down. He was studying economics on a scholarship, working 3 jobs, and he had this ferocious ambition. He was going to conquer the world, and I was foolish enough to believe I could conquer it with him." She spoke of their meeting at a college library, of late-night talks fueled by cheap coffee and big dreams. He wasn't cruel then. He was intense, passionate, and fiercely intelligent. He'd wooed her with poetry and promises of a future filled with art and adventure. He was the one who bought her the silver locket from a small antique shop, telling her it would hold their story. "La Petite Lune was our place," Sarah continued, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "We'd save up for weeks to afford 1 meal there. He always made me order the fennel and orange salad. He said it was as bright and surprising as I was." Ilara's heart ached. The image of the young, ambitious boy was so violently at odds with the cold, arrogant man she knew. "What happened?" Ilara prompted gently. Sarah's smile faded. "He started getting noticed. An internship at a big firm, a mentor who saw his ruthless potential. The world he wanted to conquer started opening its doors to him, and he ran through them without looking back. He became different, more focused, colder. Our late-night talks turned into him working on stock portfolios, while I sat in silence. I felt myself becoming a footnote in his grand story." Then came the inevitable. Sarah discovered she was pregnant. "I was terrified, but I was also so happy." She whispered, her hand instinctively going to her stomach, as if the memory still lived there. "I thought a baby would bring him back to me. To us. I told him in our favorite spot, a bench overlooking the Charles River. I imagined he'd be thrilled." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "He went completely still. I'll never forget the look on his face. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even anger. It was calculation. Like I was a variable in an equation he was trying to solve. He told me a baby wasn't part of his 5-year plan. He said it would be an anchor, tying him down when he was about to set sail." The words, even recounted 2 decades later, were brutal. Ilara felt a fresh wave of anger on her mother's behalf. "He disappeared for a week," Sarah said, her voice flat. "No calls, nothing. I was a wreck. Then one day a man in a suit I'd never seen before showed up at my door. A lawyer. His name was Marcus Thorne. He handed me a cashier's check for $50,000. $50,000, Ilara gasped. It was an enormous sum back then. And a contract, Sarah added, her eyes glistening with fresh tears. The money was contingent on me signing a non-disclosure agreement. I was to disappear from Alistair's life, never contact him again, and never reveal the identity of my child's father. The contract stated that this was a clean break to allow him to pursue his unfettered professional ascent. The corporate sterile language was so quintessentially Alistair Sterling that it made Alara sick to her stomach. "What did you do?" "I tore up the contract in the lawyer's face," Sarah said, a flicker of the old fire returning to her eyes. "But I kept the check, not for me. For you. I put it in a trust fund that I never touched. I was so proud, so determined to prove that I didn't need his blood money. I wanted to raise you on my own terms. That money is what paid for your first year of art school, Alara. It's the only thing he ever gave you." She finally broke down again, the shame and pain of the memory overwhelming her. "I should have told you. I was just so ashamed, and I wanted to protect you. I didn't want you to know that your father was a man who tried to buy your absence." Alara wrapped her arms around her mother, holding her tight as she cried. All the anger Alara felt towards her mother for keeping the secret dissolved, replaced by a profound understanding of her sacrifice. Her mother had shielded her, not just from a name, but from a devastating truth that she was the daughter of a man who saw her as a liability on a balance sheet. As she held her mother, Alara's sorrow began to crystallize into something harder, something clearer. Resolve. She now understood the cruelty in his eyes at the restaurant. It wasn't just a billionaire's arrogance. It was the deep, unsettling discomfort of a man being confronted by a past he had paid to bury. She wasn't just a waitress to him. She was a ghost, a walking, talking reminder of a choice he had made, of a life he had discarded. His torment of her was a desperate, pathetic attempt to maintain control, to diminish the woman who was living proof of his own heartlessness. The fight was no longer about bad tips and insulting notes. It was about her mother's honor. It was about her own identity. Alistair Sterling wanted a clean break. He wasn't going to get one. He had started this war at her table, but she was going to end it in his world. The next morning, Alara woke with a purpose that felt like ice in her veins. She was no longer just a waitress or a struggling artist. She was Sarah Vance's daughter, and she was going to confront the man who had tried to erase them. She called the restaurant and quit. The manager, Mr. Henderson, was shocked, but Alara's voice left no room for argument. The Gilded Spoon was a chapter of her life that was now closed. Her target was Sterling Tower, a monument of glass and steel that clawed at the Boston skyline, a physical manifestation of Alistair's ambition. Dressed not in her waitress uniform, but in her best black blouse and slacks, her gallery-opening outfit, she felt like a soldier heading into battle. The lobby was an expanse of marble and hushed importance. A severe-looking receptionist sat behind a desk the size of a small car. "I'm here to see Alistair Sterling," Alara said, her voice far steadier than her hammering heart. The receptionist didn't even look up from her computer. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but if you tell him it's about La Petite Lune, he'll see me." Alara was banking on the name being a grenade powerful enough to blow past the corporate defenses. The woman's perfectly manicured fingers paused on her keyboard. She gave Alara a dismissive once-over, then sighed and picked up her phone, murmuring into the receiver. A moment later, she looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "He's not available. Mr. Thorne from the legal department will see you." "No," Alara said firmly. "I'm not here to see his lawyer. I'm here to see him." But it was too late. A tall, impeccably dressed man with graying hair and a weary expression was already striding towards her. He was older now, but Elara recognized the name instantly from her mother's story. Marcus Thorne, the man who had delivered the check. "Miss," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "I'm Marcus Thorne, Mr. Sterling's general counsel. Perhaps I can assist you." "You can assist me by getting out of my way," Elara replied. Her eyes locked on the elevator bank behind him. "I'm afraid I can't do that," Thorne said, his expression hardening slightly. "Whatever your business is with Mr. Sterling, it can be addressed through the proper channels." Elara knew she had one shot. She wasn't going to get past this man with polite requests. So she did the one thing they wouldn't expect. She raised her voice. "Alistair!" She shouted, her voice ringing through the cathedral-like silence of the lobby. Heads turned. The receptionist gasped. "Alistair Sterling! You can send your lawyer, you can hide on the 50th floor, but I know who you are. Sarah Vance sent me." Security guards started moving towards her. Thorne's face was a mask of controlled panic. "Miss, you need to lower your voice. You're creating a disturbance." "Good," she yelled, her voice trembling but resolute. "He disturbed our lives. It's time I disturbed his." Just as a security guard reached for her arm, a disembodied voice crackled from Thorne's earpiece. He listened, his eyes widening slightly. He held up a hand to the guards, stopping them in their tracks. He looked at Elara, a new grudging respect in his eyes. "Fine," he sighed, gesturing towards the private elevator. "He'll see you, against my very strong advice." The elevator ride to the penthouse floor was a silent, tension-filled ascent. The doors opened directly into a vast, minimalist office that felt more like an art gallery than a workspace. 3 of the walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a godlike view of the city below. The 4th was dominated by a single, massive abstract painting in shades of black and grey. And behind a sprawling black desk sat Alistair Sterling. He looked haggard. The arrogant mask was gone, replaced by a deep, troubled exhaustion. He hadn't slept. "Leave us, Marcus," he commanded, his voice hoarse. Thorne gave Elara one last warning look before retreating, the elevator doors closing with a soft hiss, sealing them in. "What do you want?" Alistair asked, his hands steepled in front of him on the desk. "Money, is that it? After all these years, you've come for more money." The accusation was so predictable, so insulting that Elara's fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, righteous anger. "Money," she laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "You think this is about money? You send your lackey to offer my mother a check to disappear. You spend a month tormenting me at my job, and you think I came here for a handout." She walked closer, her footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floor. She reached into her purse and pulled out an old, faded photograph, slapping it down on his pristine desk. It was a picture of a young Sarah and an even younger Alistair laughing on a park bench, the Boston skyline behind them. He looked happy, carefree, a version of himself he had probably murdered long ago. "This is what I want," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I want you to look at her face and tell me how much she was worth." 50,000. 100. What's the going rate for abandoning your child? Mr. Sterling. He flinched as if she'd struck him, his eyes fixed on the photograph. He seemed to shrink in his expensive chair. "She told me you tore up the contract," he murmured almost to himself. "She did," Elara shot back. "But you didn't know that, did you? You just assumed she took the money and ran. It was easier that way. No guilt, no consequences. Just a clean transaction." She leaned forward, placing her palms flat on his desk. Well, the transaction isn't clean anymore. I am the consequence. And my mother is sick, Alistair. She has a heart condition, and the stress of all this isn't helping. For 22 years, she protected me from you from this truth. She worked her fingers to the bone so she wouldn't have to touch your blood money. She is 10 times the person you will ever be. Alistair finally looked up from the photo, his eyes swimming with a turmoil she had never seen before. The cold arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a raw, naked pain. I didn't know, he stammered. Sick, I never— Of course you didn't know. Elara's voice rose. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. You built this glass tower as a monument to yourself, and you locked the door on anything that didn't fit into your perfect, calculated life. Well, I'm here to break the glass. He stood up, looking utterly lost in the cavernous office. He walked to the window, his back to her, staring down at the city he had conquered. What do you want from me? He asked again. But this time the question was different. It wasn't an accusation. It was a plea. I want you to know that you didn't just walk away from a problem, Elara said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. You walked away from a daughter, and she's standing right behind you. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped. A silhouette of power against a backdrop of his own creation, utterly and completely defeated. Elara had breached the fortress, but what lay inside was not a monster, but the ruins of a man. Alistair remained at the window for a long time, the silence in the office stretching thin and taut. The sounds of the city below, distant sirens, the hum of traffic were a faint reminder of the world he usually commanded, but now seemed completely detached from. Elara stood her ground, her anger beginning to cool into a heavy, watchful stillness. Finally, he turned. The fight was gone from his eyes, replaced by a hollowed-out confusion. You have her eyes, he said, his voice raspy. I should have seen it. I think some part of me did. That's why I kept coming back. I couldn't understand why a stranger, a waitress, could get under my skin. It's easy to get under your skin when they're your own flesh and blood, Elara retorted, though the fire in her words was banking. He sank back into his chair, looking decades older than he had an hour ago. He pressed a button on his intercom. Marcus, in my office, now. Marcus Thorne entered the room with the cautious tread of a man walking into a minefield. He glanced from Alistair's shattered expression to Elara's defiant one. Marcus, Alistair began, his voice flat and devoid of its usual authority. Tell me again. The Sarah Vance file. Exactly what happened? Thorne stiffened. Sir, with all due respect, perhaps this isn't the appropriate— Now, Marcus, Alistair commanded, a flicker of his old power returning. 22 years ago. Tell me. The lawyer sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. He looked at Elara, then at his boss. The plan was as you instructed. I was to present Miss Vance with the settlement and the non-disclosure agreement. A clean break. And she accepted, Alistair stated, though it now sounded like a question. Thorne hesitated. His eyes darted between them. He seemed to be having a war with his own conscience. This is a matter of attorney-client privilege, Alistair. To hell with privilege. Alistair slammed his fist on the desk, the sound echoing in the stark room. This is my daughter. The words spoken aloud for the first time seemed to hang in the air, electric and fragile. Thorne took a deep breath, his professional mask crumbling. She didn't accept, not at first. As your daughter said, she tore up the agreement. She was furious, proud. She said you couldn't buy her dignity. Elara watched the lawyer, a new, unexpected twist tightening in her gut. But the check was cashed. Alistair insisted, his brow furrowed in confusion. The bank records confirmed it. Yes, Thorne said quietly. It was, about a week later. He paused, steeling himself. But there's something you don't know. Something your father made me swear never to tell you. Alistair went rigid. My father, he was your primary mentor back then. Thorne explained, his voice low. He was grooming you, pushing you. He saw Sarah and the baby as a threat to the empire he wanted you to build. When I reported back that she had refused the offer, he intervened. The story that unfolded was a second, deeper layer of betrayal. Alistair's father, a man as ruthless as his son would become, had visited Sarah personally. He hadn't used threats, but a far more insidious weapon, emotional manipulation. He'd told her that if she truly loved Alistair, she would let him go. He painted a picture of a brilliant future she would destroy, of a man she would forever resent her for holding back. He convinced her that cashing the check and disappearing was the most selfless act of love she could perform. And then he took it a step further. Thorne continued, his gaze fixed on the floor. Sarah did more than just cash the check. A month after that, she came to my office. She had a letter for you, Alistair, and she tried to give the money back. Alistair looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. What? She'd had time to think. She said she couldn't live with herself taking the money, that it felt dirty. She had secured a small apartment and a job. The letter, I read it. She wrote that she didn't want anything from you, but she thought you had a right to know that you had a beautiful, healthy daughter. She even enclosed a photograph of the baby. Elara felt the air leave her lungs. Her mother had tried to reach him. She had tried to give him a chance. Where is it? Alistair whispered, his voice cracking. The letter. The photograph. Your father intercepted it. Thorne confessed, the words rushing out now. He was furious. He said you couldn't afford the distraction. He burned the letter and the photo in front of me. He told me to transfer the money from your account to close the loop, and he ordered me to tell you that Sarah had simply taken the money and vanished without a word. He said it would be better for you to think she was greedy than for you to be haunted by a child you couldn't have. He thought he was protecting your ambition, protecting his investment. The truth landed in the room with the force of a physical impact. Alistair Sterling, the master of his own universe, the man who believed he had made a hard but necessary choice, was a pawn in his own father's game. He hadn't just been cruel, he had been deceived. The narrative that had shaped him for 2 decades, that the love of his life had sold their story for $50,000, was a lie. He had spent his life hardening his heart against a woman who had in fact tried to reach him, tried to give him an opening. He staggered back, gripping the edge of his desk for support. The foundation of his entire adult life. The justification for his coldness, his isolation, his relentless pursuit of success above all else had just been demolished. He looked at Elara, and for the first time she saw not a tyrant or a father, but a man drowning in a sea of regret. He had been a villain in her story, but he was also a victim in his own. All this time, Alistair breathed the words catching in his throat. All this time, I thought. He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The anger in Elara's heart, the righteous fury that had carried her to this office, finally completely dissolved. It was replaced by a profound and aching sadness for the 3 lives that had been broken by pride, ambition, and a devastating decades-old lie. The revelation hung in the sterile air of the office, changing everything. Alistair was no longer a simple villain, but a tragic figure trapped in a cage built by his father's ambition and his own. He seemed to crumble before Ilara's eyes, the weight of 22 lost years crashing down on him at once. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely unlock it. "Cancel my meetings," he barked at his assistant through the speaker. "All of them, for the rest of the week." He looked at Ilara, his expression stripped bare of all artifice. It was a look of pure, unadulterated desperation. "The hospital," he said, his voice ragged. "Where is she? Take me to her." Ilara hesitated for a fraction of a second. A part of her, the wounded part that had been tormented for weeks, wanted to refuse to make him suffer a little longer. But looking at the broken man before her, she knew that revenge was a hollow victory. This was about more than just settling a score. She nodded. "Boston General, Cardiac Care Unit." The ride down in the elevator was silent. The ride in his chauffeured Maybach was even quieter. Alistair stared out the window, but he wasn't seeing the city. He was seeing ghosts. Ilara watched him, a complex storm of emotions churning inside her. She felt pity, anger, confusion, and a strange, unwelcome flicker of empathy. They walked into the hospital, the smell of antiseptic and illness, a stark contrast to the leather and polish of his car. Alistair, in his perfect suit, looked profoundly out of place, a king in a land of the sick and suffering. When they reached the door to Sarah's room, he stopped, his hand hovering over the handle, his nerve failing him. "I can't," he whispered, his voice thick with fear. "What can I possibly say to her?" "Maybe you could start with hello," Ilara said softly, pushing the door open. Sarah was sitting up in bed, propped against a stack of pillows, a book lying open in her lap. She was paler and more frail under the harsh fluorescent lights. She looked up as they entered her eyes, first finding Ilara, then sliding to the man standing behind her. Her breath caught in her throat. The book slipped from her fingers, falling silently to the blanket. "Ali." She whispered the name, a ghost on her lips. Alistair took a hesitant step into the room. He looked at the woman in the hospital bed, the vibrant girl from his memories, now faded and worn by time and illness. He saw the IV drip in her arm, the heart monitor beeping a steady, fragile rhythm beside her bed. This was the reality of his clean break. Tears streamed down his face, silent and unchecked. He made a choked sound, a sob of pure, undiluted regret. "Sarah," he breathed, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know." He stumbled forward and collapsed into the visitor's chair by her bed, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with the force of his sobs. All the power, all the arrogance, all the billions of dollars were meaningless. He was just a man, weeping for a past he could never get back. Sarah watched him, her own eyes filling with tears. She reached out a trembling hand and placed it on his arm. "I know, Ali," she said softly. "I know." Ilara stood in the doorway, a silent witness to the reunion of two people whose lives had diverged so tragically. It was messy and painful, and decades too late. But it was real. In the days that followed, Alistair Sterling mobilized his empire for a singular purpose. He had Sarah transferred to a private suite. He flew in the best cardiac specialists from around the world. He paid for everything, brushing aside any talk of cost. But it wasn't just about money anymore. He showed up every single day. He sat by Sarah's bed, sometimes talking for hours, filling in the silent decades, confessing his regrets, listening to her stories about raising Alara. Other times they would just sit in a comfortable silence, two people rediscovering a language they had long forgotten. His interactions with Alara were awkward and tentative. He didn't know how to be a father. He offered her things: a new apartment, a car tuition to any art school in the world. Alara politely refused them all. "I don't want your money, Alistair," she told him one afternoon in the hospital cafeteria. "I never did." "Then what do you want?" he asked, his frustration and helplessness evident. "I want my mother to get better," she said, "and after that, I don't know. Maybe I just want a father who asks about my art." The next day, he came to the hospital not with a specialist, but with a large flat portfolio. He handed it to her. Inside were the finest German-made charcoals, Japanese sketchbooks, and a set of professional-grade pastels. "Tell me about your art," he said, his voice quiet, hopeful. It was a start, a small, fragile first step on a long, uncertain road. There were no magic wands, no instant happy family. There was a mountain of pain and 22 years of absence that could never be fully erased. Sarah's prognosis was improving, but the future was still uncertain. Alara knew she might never fully forgive him. Forgiveness wasn't a single event, but a process, and theirs was just beginning. But as she sat there in the sterile hospital cafeteria, showing her father her sketches for the first time, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt before. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was hope. The hope that what was broken could with time and effort be mended, and that even the most damaged roots could find a way to grow again. And so the story of Alara Vance and Alistair Sterling doesn't end with a perfect storybook reunion. It ends with a beginning, a difficult, complicated, and painfully real beginning. It's a powerful reminder that our lives are shaped not just by the choices we make, but by the truths we're told and the secrets that are kept from us. Alistair's wealth couldn't buy back a single lost moment, but his humility, born from devastating truth, opened the door for a second chance. It's a story about how the deepest wounds can sometimes come from family, but also how family can sometimes be the only place to find true healing. What do you think? Can 2 decades of pain and lies ever be truly overcome? Is forgiveness possible, or are some wounds just too deep? We'd love to read your thoughts on this incredible story in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who appreciates a story about the complexities of life and family. And most importantly, if you want more true life dramas and compelling narratives like this one, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming next. Thank you for listening.